Well, hey, welcome everybody to Chinwag Nation episode number 5. Want to get this right. Beneath the surface, the human side of leading well. We have Crystal Wade with us. She is a senior consultant in the organizational development space. And we were talking with Crystal last week and we're like, what do we really want to lean into? And she's like, the human side. Like, let's talk about that. And that, if you think about what we're about with third place, like leaning into the hard stuff as a community, I think that's fair, right? Like if we're in a high demand space, like how do we weave in the human? And sometimes it's not always easy. A little bit of housekeeping. These opinions are our own. They're not representative of a past, current, or future organizations. We really just want to create a community around leadership, want to do the hard stuff together, and really kind of talk about how we've leveraged in our collective careers, working through this as a community. And frankly, like this space right here, we've all worked together in the past. We've all had community in the leadership space. And so this is definitely relevant for us. And if you were able to see our posts on this, there's kind of like 4 key points, and we'll try to weave those in today. But we really want to make this about the Chinwag, right? And a discussion, a free flowing discussion, and talk as a group. And so, Crystal, one of the first points was seeing and hearing people in a deeper way, right? And I was sitting there thinking about that and chewing on it. I couldn't help but wonder, like, is this dependent upon the person, right? Or is this dependent upon like the nature of the organization? And what I mean by that is, if I'm a leader, and I think I mentioned this a second ago, and I'm moving really, really fast, and the demands of my space don't allow me to see and hear people in a deeper way. And what I mean by that is like there's the constraints, right? Or at least maybe they're self-imposed, they're not within my control. Like, how do you navigate through that? Like, what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, such a good question, Brian, because I think we've all been in those kinds of situations where um, we can be so task oriented and process heavy that, especially in the line of work that we do, and it's so easy to miss kind of that human element. What I would say is there are probably more opportunities than what meets the eye. And this is kind of where I get really curious about. So, a lot of my background is kind of in the lean Six Sigma space. And I think what one of the many things that drew me back, and I know we've shared some of those spaces together, is it's about surfacing problems. And in order to be able to do that, you really have to be able to dig a little bit deeper. And I think when I found myself in those situations, and there's a couple that come to mind, I get very, very curious about how to be able to surface the human element in a way that is honoring and respectful of the people in the space. So sometimes it might be appropriate just to continue with the task, but there might be other opportunities where you can look and see where you can make that human connection. Maybe that's in a meeting, maybe it's somewhere else in a small touch point on the side. But I do think, especially in the day and age that we live in, when we're going very fast and we're kind of a sound bites kind of culture in a lot of ways, taking the time to get curious and getting curious about the human side of things, I think can be so beneficial, because I think we miss a lot when we don't stop ourselves sometimes and ask those questions. So, not appropriate necessarily in every setting,
So,
but
like
probably more than we realize.
like in the flow, not necessarily having to be feeling like it's scripted, right? So
Yeah.
find the opportunities. I like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll give you, I mean, I can give you an example too of
Yeah.
like
Love it.
certain meetings I've been in where it wasn't the appropriate time. There was some very specific things that needed to be done. It was a very short amount of time, but there were some offline conversations and there were some other touch points that could be had where, and it doesn't have to be super long, it doesn't have to be super hard, but making sure that we're recognizing and honoring that human element. Because usually they come out in some way, shape, or form. And being intentional about it can be very helpful. Sorry, I think you're gonna give
No,
some.
you're good. Yeah, I love the examples. The stories matter. I think that helps like me connect right to this idea, and really kind of the people who might be on. And if you are on, please go ahead and pop your comments in chat. We can see them and respond to them in real time. So please don't hesitate and wait for the end. But Stephen, you had, I
Yeah,
think I saw you leaning in, so I wanted to.
yeah. I had a bit of a philosophical question for you, Crystal, because one of the things that we're trying to do with this Chinwag Nation podcast, right, is honing in on leadership. And just because somebody may be in a leadership position doesn't necessarily make them a leader, right? But we still haven't fully answered the question as to like what makes a leader, and why are we creating this space. And so when you're talking about leaning in deeper and listening, understanding at a deeper level, at the same time you're saying that there's opportunities out there where sometimes you just have to focus on the process and the deliverable. And even now today, with where technology has gone, we're seeing companies kind of lean out and streamline themselves. Why take that time to invest in the human element if it isn't necessarily something you're being measured against? I know it's a tough question, but
It's such a good question.
It
And I,
touches on the psychological safety point as well, right? If you think about that, yeah.
yeah, I mean, if I'm just from my limited perspective, the short answer is because the people side is the most important part. Um, why are we doing what we're doing? I would venture to say that probably most people would honestly answer, well, I'm trying to make some kind of impact on people's lives. And that could be through a service, that could be through a product. I mean, there's so many ways to do that. And if we're really honest with ourselves, I don't think that we are going to be as successful as we can in delivering whatever service or product
Hmm.
to our communities unless we really consider the human element. And I understand the intimidation factor because it is intimidating. It is messy. I mean,
I mean,
let's not
what
let's
if
not
you what if you aren't a leader
about it.
that like loves to lead and loves to lead people, but they don't love they like to maybe want to keep it on the surface. Maybe it's a matter of reducing
Yeah,
risk, right? Like how do
yeah.
if I don't have the risk appetite for digging deeper from on a relational level, and
Mhm.
I'm not talking about just the care, right? But like just
Yeah.
hey, I'm a leader, I'm a boss, maybe,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I'm here to make sure there's
Get things done.
productivity, right?
Yeah.
And so like, what are your recommendations for getting over
Yeah.
that barrier, right? That risk barrier. And Stephen, you as well. I mean,
I honestly, where I, again, going to the hard work, this is not an easy answer. You
mhm,
have to look at yourself, right? Because no
mhm,
matter what job we do, you're going to be working with people. So I'm not proposing that in every meeting that we are just, sitting around a circle and, what happened to you and you know what I mean, going deep. I'm not proposing that we do that. However, I think any leader, if they're going to be effective, you have to um, work with and navigate the people side. And whether that's the people that you immediately manage or that's the people who work with you. Like any leader, I think it takes a team. So I would never say that you have to have all the tools yourself. You work with a team, but again, you're working with people. And so I think that that takes a level of self awareness and perhaps even self work, where you're asking yourselves, what is the barrier? What is preventing me
mhm,
from recognizing and connecting on the human side of things? And
mhm,
those are some really scary questions to ask ourselves sometimes. So it takes courage to do that. And again, it doesn't have to be all at once, but maybe taking small steps in that direction to start asking yourself some of those hard questions, I think could be really helpful. And by the way, it's not just at work, it's in life in general.
true.
So all the things we talk about here, I think by and large, as a leader, are all things that can be applied in your everyday life as well. So,
So
yeah,
seeing and hearing is not just an external activity; it's also an internal activity.
big
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
Yeah. If you're not giving yourself the opportunity to extend grace and safety to yourself, I think it's really hard to be able to also do that with others. And so I think it's yes and Brian. It's both. That's a term we'll get to, I'm sure. But yeah. asking yourselves the question and then giving yourself permission to ask that with others.
Absolutely.
Yeah, such a good question, Stephen.
So you talked about yes and Stephen, I don't know if you have any thoughts here before we kind of talk about this idea of yes and.
Well, I mean, I asked a question that I didn't really know how to answer myself, because being a leader is hard. You talk about, the situations can vary, right? And there was a time when I was first starting out in my first leadership position where I couldn't take the risks that I was taking because I had to make sure that I was getting a stable paycheck.
Why couldn't you take the risk?
Because at that time I had somebody take a risk on me to give opportunity, but I didn't have the results or the experience to easily fall back into a similar level of role. And I think at the beginning of this podcast, you could hear some crying babies in the background, and those are my babies. Brian's at my house, like that.
That's the best part right there.
There is some self-interest, right? In the sense, like, I've got to provide for my family and take care of them, and pressure's on to make sure that they're getting fed. And as I've gained experience and I've gained credibility and I've delivered results, I have more flexibility in my career, less risk to be able to step out and apply my own sort of philosophies. Because for me, it's very personal. Including from the people that took risks on me and gave me a chance, and how much that increased my productivity as well as catapulted my career because I took that opportunity to be able to give that back and realize that even in the most streamlined organizations that may be using the technology that's available to them, whether that's AI or something else, right? If I can maximize trust, if I can maximize psychological safety, if I can help people get promoted, right? You're creating a culture of productivity that won't be matched as long as there's a human element to that. And for me, it's always, that's what fuels me. That's what gets me excited to go to work every day. And then the production and the output of that is a byproduct that leadership appreciates, is just a byproduct. And so it's a win-win for me, but it takes a while, right? Which is why I was asking this philosophical question. Everybody's got for showing up to work.
Well, you hit it right on the head too, Stephen, when you said this is very personal. And I would venture to say from probably almost all of us, work is personal. We can't separate the work person versus the other personal side of a person. We come all together, and I'm not saying again that we should show everything all the time at work. There's a level of appropriateness and helpfulness there that we have to gauge. But I don't think I've ever run into a situation where there wasn't some opportunity to be able to connect on the human element and honor the human side of what we bring when we work together, even if it's not right away, because there are legitimate risks involved. And there has to be an element of safety. So you take bigger and bigger steps towards that, of course, as you build trust. But I would venture to say that you can probably find, even in an environment that is very difficult and perhaps unsafe in certain respects, there probably is some kind of way to still be able to make a human connection. Usually.
Yeah, it sounds like Stephen too, and you kind of talked about this earlier, Krista, was living in the tension of yes and. Like, what does that even mean? Like, what were you thinking when you came up with that?
Well, I'm sure I didn't come up with it. I'm sure I probably repeated a phrase that I heard somewhere else. Actually, you know where I think it really hit me? I had an amazing boss. So I think we share this in terms of, like, we've had some maybe not so great examples of leaders, but also some really amazing examples of leaders, and one of the best leaders I've had the opportunity to work with. And I would often hear them in conversations when they were speaking with people on their team, and they would say, yes, but. And because this leader was someone who had provided a safe culture where you could give them feedback, this person that they would often be in conversation and they would say, oh, I hear that. I hear what you're saying. Yes. But this, they got feedback from that person and said, you know what, when you say but, I feel like you're kind of invalidating things.
Interesting.
And that was completely not the intention of this leader that I worked for. And so it made me think, and I think when they started changing their language to the yes and, I think that more accurately was describing what they were going for, which is essentially validating someone's experience, not in any way diminishing it, and holding a space for additional perspectives that may or may not push against that. So I'll give you an example. So I've done, again, I've had some background in like the Lean Six Sigma space. So one of my favorite things would be to host these workshops where we would have this big long process, right? Um, I'll give you an example. We did one where we were looking at like the classification and compensation process for the state. So we brought in, HR who holds that process, but we also brought in a lot of other teams like supervisors, managers on different teams, et cetera. And what often we heard in these events was, oh, I have this problem. I have this challenge. This isn't working for me. So let's no longer do it. Right. And then a team member from another team would say, no, we need to do that because I have to do this with it. That had, no visibility to the initial team member who rose that problem. And so in those instances, what we loved about it is that it was still recognizing and bringing up the problems and perspectives that people had, and bringing in some additional perspective of, yes, and the reason why we have to do this is because of this. So it created a more holistic picture. So you're holding both tensions of, absolutely, that is frustrating. I hear you. And the reason why this happens is because of this. So let's bring these together and together try to figure out with even this tension, how we can work through it. And I've just found that that's a principle that works all the time, right? Just being able to hold two pieces of tension without invalidating either experience. It's not a comfortable place to be, but I have found more often than not, it's a very helpful way to frame points of tension.
For me, this is a little bit of a stretch, but something you said, Crystal, really resonates with me. And even in a place of tension, there's a reason for the visceral reaction that's causing this, this feeling of stress, right? And I am confident walking into a room and saying that I am not the smartest individual in a particular room. I am also confident in my ability to say that Brian's just blown away.
I see Brian's face.
But I can say is I'm
it's true, Stephen. I'm just messing with you.
I know. I'm very confident in my aptitude and competency to listen and understand from other perspectives who have that experience, who have been working in their respective areas for a long period of time. And I think when we're talking about this deeper understanding and why we do it as well, is that you have to be able to trust your team. Sometimes, we talked about decision making, one of our first episodes. Sometimes you have to take a step back and listen if you truly want to make the best decision, if time allows. And so that deeper understanding, that leaning into your team, having your team know about your competency and your ability to learn, but also your humility as a leader, I think is super important in how you're approaching and working with people.
I think that needs to be stated too, right? And I think about this bullet that you wrote out as well, that we listed out, like creating psychological safety in terms of how we show up, right? There's intent in our heads that doesn't always get verbalized, right? I'm showing up in this way. This is important for me, right? To build trust.
Yeah.
And this is not a sound effect. That's a little silent somewhere. I'm gonna call that out.
I'm so sorry. I think that's on me.
No, yeah, no worries. I love the life happening around us.
Life is happening.
And I think it makes it even more real and authentic, and especially with how we show up. I think even calling in life, let's just use that, right? Talking about hearing life, sharing life, sharing with our head.
Here's the human side of my life showing up, Brian.
It's it's how we create safety. It's the little things that and I think it's sometimes getting out of our head too. I think I've heard you many times, Stephen, say like, hey, like I do these things because I want to build trust. I'm sharing information with you, right, in our space to build trust. And I think those little acts make a huge difference.
I agree. I agree. I love it. I
It is.
love this is like so on point, on brand for the topic of this episode.
It's because Brian and I are in the same house, but he's downstairs where my kids are.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yep.
I will just add to that. I agree 100% with what each of you has said. And I think this is part of even just, I mean, when you walk through hard things in life, again, just giving yourself that space as well to not invalidate what you're feeling. I think that taught me a really big lesson where um, giving myself the opportunity to feel and experience things that had a true impact. And what we know now is that things, especially traumatic things, not only affect us psychologically, they affect us physically. Like our bodies actually carry these things. And so they really, I mean, impact us in ways that I don't even think we fully realize. And so we don't want to invalidate those experiences for people. Those are real, true, valid concerns and things that they bring up. And so, unless I think we honor and recognize that, those underlying currents, I don't know how effective we can be with certain types of problem solving because they're going to be there. And so, we might as well speak to that and surface that as appropriate um, because it's a real reality for people.
I got a question for you too around this, and it kind of stays true to what we're trying to do here in these conversations and the subjects that we lean into. Like, has it ever been hard to do that? You know, and because I mean, like, I think it's one of the easiest things in the leadership space, right? Is, and I'm not saying that's what you're doing. I'm saying like, let's dig a little bit deeper on this. One of the easiest things to do in the leadership space is to stay in theory, right? I remember my leadership course in my master's degree, like all my binders were like this thin, but then I got to my leadership course and it was like this, right? Because there is a massive amount of information. There's a massive amount of theory, right? You go down LinkedIn and it's like every other post is about how we should do the thing, right? How we should lead. And then we want to talk about why is it hard to do that thing?
Yeah,
And so has it ever been hard, right, to do what you just
1,000,000%.
described? And like, and how did you overcome that? And what did you do to make it, I guess, less hard?
1,000,000%, especially when you're engaging in certain type of conflicts that can trigger you. Again, we're all human. We all have our trigger points. And I've certainly been in situations where it has challenged me. They talk about this thing in psychology. Have you heard this called your window of tolerance?
I have.
So it's I'm not an expert. It's just a theory that kind of stuck with me a little bit, where it's like we each individually, particularly in certain areas that relate to conflict in our lives and trauma and things of the like, we each have a certain level of tolerance that we can engage in before we kind of go into like survival,
And
right?
that's not
Fight or
static,
flight.
right? That's
No,
actually, the window can
no, yeah.
expand and contract, I would
Yeah,
imagine. Okay.
absolutely. Absolutely, it can. And so there have certainly been times where I have encountered things that have gotten me outside of that window of tolerance. um, and again, this just takes, I think, true effective leadership is not anyone, I think, will tell you that they want a leader that actually um, does what they say. You know, they walk the talk as opposed to just talking about it. And so that really does put a level of accountability there, where we're not just saying these things, we need to live them ourselves. And so the things that help me, um, it depends, but I think again, being self-reflective and self-aware when you are walking into situations that might bring out things that are really challenging within yourself, and being honest about what those challenges are. So I'll give you an example. There have been situations where, I mean, gosh, I've been in situations where I've been called upon to lead in areas where the overwhelming fear and voice shouting at me is that I am incompetent and I do not have what it takes. And that can be a really difficult thing to walk through. And the beautiful part of being able to walk in the human aspect of this is as you extend grace to others, hopefully you learn to also do that for yourself and be vulnerable at times when you need to. So I've had times where I've just had to say, hey guys, I'm struggling here. And I need to be able to re-engage at a time when I can kind of work through these things, right? So again, that human conversations, we all need to have them. This is not just other people having them towards us. We need to be able to engage in those moments as well. So was that answer
Yeah,
your question, Brian?
yeah. I mean, it's when we talk about like this being a hard thing to do, right, into human and dig beneath the surface, like we want to learn from you and Stephen and just this conversation in terms of like what are the things that you've done to kind of work through that and navigate through, I think, kind of that leaning in aspect. I remember Stephen, before, and I would love to hear from you, like how you've worked through that. I remember I was starting a new gig, and Stephen and I were connected at the time, and I said, "Man, I'm really nervous." And he said, "Well, just tell them that you're nervous."
Mhm. Yeah.
I'm like, "Okay, I'm just going to tell them I'm
Yeah.
nervous." And it
Yeah.
worked out, right? It's like, oh, right, this person's a real person, and of course it makes sense that, right, I'm nervous because this is a brand new job and I'm meeting 50 new people that I've never met before for the first time. And so I think that kind of something as simple as just what you kind of just described, just stating like this is where I'm at and this is why I'm where I'm at, can
Mhm.
help get through some of the hard stuff. But Stephen, your thoughts
Mhm.
and kind of
Well,
has it ever been hard for you, and how did you overcome that?
yeah. Well, first off, to your example, Brian, I just want to highlight the fact that, like, I remember that conversation. I don't think we've talked about our working
Stephen
dynamic.
doesn't ever forget anything.
No, well, I honestly,
Like he helps me remember, like, oh, you remember that time? Like,
I,
oh yeah, yeah, great.
so to me, as a leader, for having that conversation, it was just a minor, small
Mm,
conversation to coach, but they just want there to be awareness of how sometimes those small interactions could be profoundly impactful for people. So keep that in mind on your leadership journey. And it sort of segues into how I would answer this question, because where my mind immediately went is there is extremely complicated variables that make it hard to be a people centric leader. It could be the nature of your deliverables, the tenure in your role. It could be the culture in which you're integrated into, whether you're operating in a silo with the culture you're trying to build, or if it's something that your company or your work supports, the nature of your team, the level of trust, right? And those are complicated enough. But something that doesn't get talked about is being a people centric leader creates vulnerabilities and challenges for that leader when you have to make really tough decisions too. And I bring that up because I was just thinking about, in my tenure as a leader, what has been hard. And when you're always in a position of authority. I had a staff member remind me of that, right? Like, and some believe that you can't be friends, right? But you developed a strong sense of trust and a strong sense of understanding with your organization, and then say maybe you have to do layoffs, or maybe you have to let someone go, or maybe you 99% of the time allow your senior leaders to have the autonomy and the authority to have delegated decision making, but there's a time where you have to tell them no. um, and when do you take that chance? When do you take that step? And when, how do you feel okay about rebuilding that trust? Because you're trying to practice what you preach. You try to show up consistently every day. You've been making this investment, but from a position of authority, and you tell somebody no after you've let them make 99 yeses.
Mhm.
Sometimes that can create some lack of stability in the culture you're trying to build, or steps back in the relationship that you're trying to foster. And for me, that stuff is heavier than a lot of the things that are normal variables in trying to establish your leadership culture, right? Is that
Yeah.
I think that moves us really kind of very smoothly into our next point, and our last point. We have about 10 minutes left before we wrap up, and I want to make sure we leave time for questions. If you have questions now, go ahead and pop them in the chat. We'll kind of track them and try to get to as many as we can as we close up. But when I was listening to you, Stephen, I couldn't help but think about like the balance between under management and over management and how the human can weave between both. But it also made me think about this last point that we had kind of discussed, in Crystal, that you had kind of posed, and that's embracing conflict is a key leadership skill, right? So I would imagine, Stephen, based off of what you shared, right, like there might be some conflict in that, right? I mean, obviously, with some of those more drastic moves, there's some conflict, but I can't help but wonder your guys' thoughts on this last idea, right? Especially with respect to what you both just shared, is when there's a conflict internally, which I think we've touched on throughout this conversation, right? But then there's potential like tension between you and another person and conflict that arises. But why is embracing conflict a key leadership skill? And let's talk about how hard that is too.
Yeah.
Right at the same time, as part of our wrap up. And then again, if you have any questions, go ahead and pop them in the chat.
Yeah. Can I be honest with you? I am a work in progress with conflict. So I am a high harmony, high peacemaker. If the Enneagram, I'm like a 2 and a 9, like that, the quintessential, like, let's just all get along and thrive in harmony. That is to the core of who I am.
Yeah,
Are we
right.
high-fiving, Brian? So this is hard for me because my natural instinct is to run from conflict. I don't like conflict. I don't like engaging in conflict. So this is something I've really had to lean into. And I've got to be honest and give credit to my husband for this. He's really good at it. And so he's taught me a lot.
Good at conflict or resolving conflict?
Oh, he's really good at both. Like he's good at surfacing conflict in a healthy way.
Yeah.
And dealing with it in a healthy way. And that has been a gift to me because, again, my natural instinct is to run. So my little bit of learning about conflict and how essential it is conflict can be one of the best gifts that can be given to people because it gives you an opportunity to elevate to a whole different level. It's an opportunity. It doesn't mean that it will always happen, but I think it can, depending on how it's engaged with. And so I should also mention, I think a big part of this, so I should have mentioned this earlier. I am so passionate about engaging in the people side of leadership, and I'm very passionate about boundaries. So remember living in the tension of yes and, like, yes, people, let's get there. Let's honor the human side and the human dignity, and let's make sure we have good boundaries. It's both, living in that tension. And I think we have to live in that tension a lot as leaders. And I think we're coming back to conflict. I think conflict can really give us an opportunity to come to new agreements and new boundaries as well. So conflict, like nothing else I have seen, can give you the opportunity to surface underlying causes and underlying root issues that may not have had the opportunity to surface otherwise. I'm not saying they always surface in the healthiest and best of ways.
Maybe keep small problems small.
Of course. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So the earlier
the better.
The better. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
and are we always perfect at that?
Like you basically make it harder on yourself by so if you want really hard and you want real growth, I guess wait to talk about the thing that's rubbing you the wrong way, right?
If you want real conflict, yeah, be like me and stuff it a bunch until it like erupts out of nowhere. Don't do that. I don't recommend it. But that is my inclination that I have to work through. But being able to create a safe environment where there is agreed upon boundaries that make people feel safe, where they can surface things that are really important. Not only can it create a level of self awareness that you didn't have before, but I think it can create a level of understanding and awareness in how to engage with people in a way that wasn't there either. Now, it can also create harm. It can also create times when you need to go and repair. So this is messy stuff. It's not perfect. And honestly, I think we need to give ourselves permission to not have to be perfect at it too, because I don't think anyone is perfect in conflict. But man, if we can learn some tools to be able to engage in a way that's helpful and honoring of people while still talking about the real issues, oh boy, can it really help anyone, right? It can help a team, it can help you with your personal development, it can help a relationship, it can help marriage. I mean, it can help so many things.
Stephen, just to wrap us up on this, um, from a culture and an organizational standpoint, right? So what Crystal just shared, like I love that. I think that's stays true to what we want to talk about today in terms of getting beneath the surface. If our organization doesn't align with that intent, like have you been in a situation like that, and how have you navigated through it? Just to
Yeah,
kind of wrap us up.
I would say more often than not in my career, when I'm trying to establish a very people centric culture, I'm oftentimes going against the grain of a lot of cultural norms that have been there and have admittedly, from my peers, operated in a silo. Sometimes that means that there could be resentment from my peers. Other times it means that their direct reports are trying to get in with our department because they've heard about what it's like to work in that area, right? But stepping outside of that all and sort of humanizing the term conflict. Enneagram 1 here, by the way. So as black and white towards perfectionism for the greater good as possible. That's where I align. Conflict itself, by definition, I think has many different definitions for whomever you're talking to. Right? We use the term visceral reaction, but I think when we use the term conflict, there's something that immediately pops into our mind, and it's usually a reactive type of response. And I would say that conflict is going to arise either from people, product, or process, in the sense that either somebody or something is not agreeing or could be better. But at the same time, people could also mean within yourself. Brian, I think you mentioned that as well. Even when Brian comes and says, hey, I'm feeling a little bit nervous about that, that's internal conflict with oneself, right? It doesn't have to be with another party. It can just be with yourself. But go and find a successful organization that released product version 1.0 and left it version 1.0, right? Now, that's always continuously improving. And the only way that you can continuously improve is you have to be able to talk about the hard stuff, what's not going well, where are things broken, and where are those, we were talking about continuous improvement, Lean Six Sigma, where are those Kaizen moments, right? To where you can improve, and creating again that psychological safety, that place of trust to be able to have those conversations, to be able to take risks, to be able to learn from your failures, to be able to hear other people's opinions and understand why maybe our go-to-market strategy didn't work the way that we anticipated it would, or whatever, right? Is important. You should always be iterating. Conflict is uncomfortable, and when you're uncomfortable, you're growing. And I would say that if you're not finding yourself in a place of discomfort, and you're finding yourself in a place where you're not in quote unquote conflict, and let me say healthy conflict, that are you really in the right space to be growing? Unless you,
what if I don't want to grow?
That's fine too.
Okay, that's the tolerance window, I guess. And digging into that, we got about a minute left. I'm gonna wrap us up, and I think what you just shared, Stephen, really touches on why we're doing this, right? Why we're creating this community, why we're creating these conversations, is to kind of talk through the hard stuff and lean into those subjects. And I think something that you shared and Crystal, you touched on, is like find that person too. right? That you can talk with and lean into, and kind of creates that safe space. And Alyssa Elliott said, "There's no comfort in the learning zone, and there's no learning in the comfort zone." What a great way to close us out, Alyssa. Love that. LinkedIn does not allow us to chat you back. So I think that's a great way to end our time. There's no comfort in the learning zone, and there's no learning in the comfort zone. I love that. So thank you, Crystal, for joining us. Thank you, Stephen, and have a great day, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Crystal.